Hello, good morning, Amy. Lovely to see you and welcome to this interesting conversation about all the work you've been doing there at City of Bristol College around moving to a developmental model of observation. Before we start, shall we do introductions then?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Amy Woodrow. I am the Teaching and Learning Manager at City of Bristol College, and my role is situated in the quality team, and I support quality assurance, quality improvement across, we've got 5 campuses, mixture of 14 plus right up to higher education, apprentices, specialists, a lot of specialist provision as well.
Great. And we've been working together over the last year and a half or so, and I'm a consultant and a trainer and a coach in the FE sector. And we've been developing work together, planning and also some of the training and the coaching support around this really exciting move that you've made to developmental observations. So let's make a start to talk about that.
Okay.
And I think we have some discussion questions that we prepared. Yeah. First question that I wanted to ask you, how's your thinking evolved and changed maybe around lesson observation, and what or who has influenced that? Has it about been attending training or reading or people that you've met? What's actually influenced and changed your thinking?
So I think it came a couple of years ago. We always, we'll talk about the previous model in a bit, but it was, the change in the sector, gradually we've seen more and more organisations moving away from traditional one-off graded lesson observations. And I guess it's that focus more on the quality improvement side and the development of the individual is the heart of it. And we trialed this with a smaller group, worked really well, and then we expanded the programme. Did a lot of reading, a lot of research. Matt O'Leary's work was really influential on this, and the work that he did with the Universities and College Union, with the UCU. So yeah, it's kind of evolved and changed as we've gone on.
And it's really for reflecting, I think, the things we're seeing in the sector around putting the teacher more at the heart of it and making this a process about thinking about your own practice and really owning the conversation around that with your observer and then looking to make change. So for me, you're absolutely right. This sits in the bigger context for me of work in the sector that's kind of emerged linked to research, but also people's experience too. So let's talk about the previous observation model and the differences between that and the new one. And I think you have a few points you can share with us around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I put together just a few points on a slide. Previous model, very similar to a lot of colleges traditionally. We observe teachers once per year. Several years ago, it was graded on the old 1 to 4 scale. If somebody received a grade 3 or a grade 4, then they were allocated a TLAC, as they were then, which is the teaching and learning coach, and then reobserved within sort of the next 4 to 6 weeks to see if that intervention had made any improvements.
Classic deficit model.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then we moved, maybe a few years back, probably 4 years ago now, I'm thinking. It was branded as an ungraded model. There were still 3 kind of outcomes, whether that was highly effective, or practitioner requires support. Similar process in place. There was an action plan. They got assigned a coach, and then they were reobserved within a set time frame. In my view, this is my personal opinion, not the view of the college necessarily, but it was still graded. Whether you're grading people pink, purple, and orange, it's still a target on their back, isn't it? But
it's like a red, amber, green, or a gold, silver, bronze. It's like the same thing, but rebadged with a different name. Yeah.
But there was still that progression there away from the numbered model, but it was still that once a year, manager led, that traditional sense. And then in 1920 we piloted a slightly different approach, and this was influenced quite a lot by Chris Moyes at Bridgewater and Taunton colleges. And they had this model called Growing Great Teachers. And what that is focused on is the teacher will complete a self-assessment and identify what their developmental needs are. They then work with the coach or somebody with the required level of expertise, and then they would be observed doing that thing. And then have those coaching conversations and that reflection afterwards. So we were heavily influenced by that. We piloted it with around 20 teachers, I think there was in the end, and it worked really, really well. So we went mass market.
Interested in what some of the gains were from that as you moved it towards being more focused on developmental for the teacher and emerging from the teacher's needs and interests, as opposed to almost a top down, I'm coming in with a checklist to see if you can do these things. What kind of benefits did you see at that point?
Oh, we saw some fantastic things. We saw, the teachers, now admittedly, the teachers that were involved in this volunteered. So they were the ones that, the kind of people that stick their hands up for these kind of things. But they all had such fascinating, really interesting quality improvement projects. Some of them were looking at metacognition, self-regulation. Some of them just wanted to try and make their lessons a bit more interesting, a bit more, that kind of thing. Some of them were looking at doing some research. So there's some really, really fascinating outputs from it. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant to see that. There was all sorts that came from it.
It's so exciting when you see that, when you see the teacher actually starting to think about something they can grow and using the observation as part of that process. So it's part of that bigger professional learning journey, as opposed to this terrible snapshot one-hit wonder visit with the checklist that people used to use to say, oh, I think you fit in that box. And then really, we're going to walk away and leave you alone and off you go. Apart from a few people who we think we're going to action plan. I really love this new approach that everybody's in a developmental loop, everybody's growing their practice. I think that's a really strong positive.
Yeah.
So your model really was moving across time at this point, and then has developed further from that.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll move on. Our new model then, obviously, we've had the impact of COVID. That's thrown a huge, huge spanner in the works. So last year we sort of did, an extended pilot. So just for context, we've got about 375 teaching staff. And between the Christmas and the Easter of 2021, we got about a third of teachers involved in this process. Which was fantastic. It was a really, really interesting experiment, and we actually got a lot of feedback from the teachers themselves, which we'll share at the end, of how they found it and what they got from it, so that it would help us inform, I guess it was my own action research there. So then that helped inform next year, for this current year, which is the full rollout of all the teaching staff based on that, previous model.
What's the value, do you think, of going for the pilot first? Because lots of colleges have started to say to me that they're finding piloting really powerful. What have you seen as the value of that?
Oh, so much. I mean, I think the basic things like fine tuning of process, those little administration things. Well, how do the things that you want to capture from it? How do we capture that? How do we report on that? Because obviously that's a big one for us, being a large organisation. There's a lot of interest from senior managers, from governors and from Ofsted as well. So we need to make sure that we're able to capture and report on it in the best possible way. But just in terms of training and things, finding out, well, what do we need training on? How does that look? It was the best possible thing to just pilot first before we went out fully.
Great. So the new model, let's think about the new model then.
Okay. So I kind of broke it down into kind of a flowchart process. So for the lecturers, I did one of these for lecturers, one for managers and one for the observers, just so everybody knew what they were doing. I mean, obviously there was written guidance as well, but sometimes people like a quick visual to show things. So the observers are allocated teachers to observe, and they're all in their own department, because we wanted to just try. The logistics of it has been really, really challenging in such a big organisation. So we kept them all observing in their own department, and that's really helped as well with people having the subject knowledge, and sharing resources. There's been a lot of sharing of resources and sharing of ideas. Oh, I use this in that. Oh, I use that. And that's been really, really great. But they don't necessarily always know each other. For example, in our ESOL team, there's about 45 lecturers. So they don't necessarily all know each other because they work 16 to 18 adult. We've got the British Sign Language, International English, just for one example. So the teachers, we ask them at the beginning of the year to complete a self-assessment document. It's very simple, it's 1 page. So the only work for the teacher in the whole of this process is 2 documents, 1 side of A4 each. So they've got a self-assessment. This is completely personal to them. They don't need to share it with their manager. It's for their own self-reflection. And I think that's really key here in building up that trust, because people don't necessarily like to talk about the areas where they're not as confident or as strong. And, you know, culture change for us was a huge part of this. So we want to get the buy-in from the staff. So by making things as friendly as possible, I think that's really, really helped with this. So they will have that. They can have that to hand when they have their first initial conversation with the observer, which we did a lot of training with the observers, how they formulate those coaching questions to really elicit, well, what is it, you know, how do we explore those kind of topics? What is it that you want to do? How are we going to get there? Those kind of questions using various different coaching models. Then after that meeting, they'll arrange a date and a time. Again, you know, making it as friendly as possible. It's not a pick a random lesson and I'm coming to that one. It's a case of, you know, well, actually, I really want to work on my engagement with my level 1 group. You know, so it's completely on their terms. It was interesting last year, we did put a little question on the form just to see where people were choosing, whether it was a level 1 or a level 3 or 4 or what have you, and the majority was level 2s and level 3s, which kind of reflects the profile of our student groups anyway. But anecdotally, there are still staff members that are playing it safe with, oh, come and see me with my doughy-eyed, bushy-tailed level 3 BTEC group, you know. But that takes time, you know, and actually the skill of the observers has been fantastic in showing, come on, what are you having a challenge with? I could really help you with that. And building that trust has been amazing. So they drop in, come into the lesson. They're only looking at the specifics of what that person wants them to look at. Obviously, we did have to put a bit of a caveat if there are any health and safety issues, any safeguarding issues, any serious concerns that, you know, are emerging. We do have a duty to report those appropriately. So we made that very, very clear. But, you know, there were ways and means of addressing things that, you know, that was in the toolkit of the coaches. So you're questioning, you know, talking about questioning, how did the learner's behavior impact on your ability to ask those questions? You know, so you can kind of, you can get people to have that awareness of the situation. So following on from that, then they will look at action plans and goals. So again, that post-observation conversation using those coaching questions, that kind of framework that we put together for them. Then they fill in an online form. So we use Microsoft at our college, and they fill in a Microsoft form with the teacher. So last year the teacher did one and the observer did one, but this year we kept it just the observer does one. But I make it very clear, fill it in alongside, or if it's an online meeting, share your screen and fill it in together, because, you know, everybody's got well within their right to see what's been written about them and shared. So again, building up that trust. Then what you can do from Microsoft Forms is print off a PDF. Or save it as a PDF so that the teacher gets that record as well. So they've got that to reflect back on. Then throughout the year, the teacher will be, you know, perhaps having one-to-ones with their line manager, appraisals. We do have checkpoints throughout the year for teaching and learning as well. So the managers can say, right, okay, so who's been observed? What did you learn? How was it? Is there anything that you can share with the team? That kind of thing. So it forms that cycle, and it's that closing the loop. Go on.
I was going to say, there are so many strengths here, I think, in the way this is put together. I really love the fact that at the beginning it's coming from the specific area that the teacher wants to talk about, because that's making it very much centered on their own needs and interests, and it's opening up that trust, isn't it, to have a conversation about something that you're reaching out to your observer to have that conversation about. I think the subject specific angle is also interesting. I think there's definitely a benefit that I've seen of people being able to follow up more fully if they're doing that observation conversation and follow up with somebody from their area, because there's, as you say, said, there's team meeting, there's sharing resources, there's
Yeah.
opportunities to just meet in a workroom or be in a virtual meeting together that you don't necessarily get if your observer isn't linked to your team. So I
No,
think that
absolutely.
it's a really interesting fit with professional development, I think.
Yeah.
And I really love also the thought that this action plan is very focused on something as opposed to 20 things, which is something that I see as a weakness in many institutions when I'm auditing
Yeah.
development plans. And the notion that you're taking this forward into a loop, that they're sharing ideas, that they're sharing progress, that they're talking about sharing resources and practice in the team, means that this is part of that bigger professional
Yes.
learning journey. So I
Yeah.
think so many strengths here, Amy. So this first iteration, what have you felt have been the strengths of that shape?
So definitely the strengths of building a trust.
Yeah.
The culture, I mean, changing the culture at the college has been like raising the Titanic and getting it to sail again, honestly, because we've had so many years of that graded deficit model. The people just don't have trust.
No, because it's about
And
judging and assessing, isn't it? It's about boxing you.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's taken a lot, and we're still plodding through it. You know, as I said, we've got teachers that are still kind of pulling out the show pony lesson, which is going to happen. It is what it is. You've got teachers that they don't know. They think, well, I'm fine. Everything's fine, because they're scared to talk about any areas that they, you know, that they're less confident with, just in case, I guess, got that fear. But there's certainly a lot of strengths around, you know, how people feel listened to, people feel supported. The other great thing that we've got is it's all peer-led. So while there are some managers in it, they're managers that still have quite chunky teaching caseloads. So they've got that currency.
Your
Yes,
observation team isn't just the hierarchy, which is
there's no
also
managers.
now this is a really major step, and
Yes.
that's an interesting one from your senior team in terms of the trust
Yeah.
to devolve the process to the lower level of the
Yeah.
hierarchy, if you like.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
okay, so how did that go down? The notion that it wouldn't be the power players, if you like, necessarily in those conversations.
Really well, actually. Do you know what? It's on both sides, because I think the thing is, for our curriculum heads of department, they are so busy. So busy. And I've been, you know, several years back now, and I was observed when I was a lecturer that I had somebody come in, I'm coming on this day, that was it. The person came in, saw what she needed to, off she popped. And then about 3 weeks later, I'm still chasing down, can I have any feedback?
It's like hit and run. It's hit and run observation.
Yeah, so that the heads of department were really welcoming of it as well, because, you know, they've got a few bits to do in this, checking in, you know, making sure everybody's on track, because we are, you know, we are monitoring how many observations have been done in each department. And so that is a KPI for them, because they need to give their observers the bit of the G up and the encouragement to get it done. But yeah, it's been really, really positive. And we're not asking people to do it for nothing. You know, we have been able to ring fence some remission for the observers. So how that looks is very different on a department by department basis, depending on how they structure their courses, their staffing, etc., etc. But there is that pot available. But yeah, not having the managers in it has been transformational for the staff.
And it was, I remember doing the training with the groups when we looked at questioning skills, we looked at listening, we looked at reflective conversation and dialogue, and they were really interested in it, and they could see it as an observation team from their own experience as practitioners, how they would value it being led more like this. So if you like, the value for me of watching that group work was they knew the process from both sides of the table, they were invested from both sides, and were really ready to move into it as, let's ask questions, let's open up conversation. And you can see, I think, in the feedback quotes that we'll see later in the slides, you can see the teachers receiving that experience as very interactive and very much about dialogue as opposed to judgment being imposed.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I'll just move on just a couple of these. So this is the version that we give to the observers, and all these links, we tried to make it as easy as possible for people. So we use Teams, so we've got a Teams site for the observers. I kind of devolved responsibility a little bit for each group for each department with my team. So I've got 5 of my team, my learning development coaches, are involved in observations. So I've devolved so they can do that check-ins, how's it going, and kind of do it on my behalf. We tried to make it as easy as possible in terms of documents, pro forma. We created templates for literally everything that are optional. Whether an introductory email that sets out what the process is all about, so that they can use that to send to the teachers. Even things like, coaching question prompts. So sometimes we didn't want it to feel like the observers have got a script.
No.
But sometimes it's just handy to have a few prompts perhaps next to you if you go a bit and it's a real skill to be able to listen effectively and listen really well without thinking, what question am I going to ask next?
Totally true. And particularly when you're starting to do this, which some of the team that we worked with who were beginning, they said this is quite new. So they wanted the support of having just a few things already written, so that if they ran out of things to say or couldn't think of a new direction or just dried up, they could just use the prompt as a well-crafted question, because as you said, there's definitely a skill in learning to craft the questions.
Absolutely.
I love the fact this is so based on a coaching ethos for me. You've centered this in all the learning that you've done about coaching, I think, in terms of how it can develop. So that's a real strength in the quality of those conversations, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And we didn't want it to be really like scripted and you've got to follow this GROW model or the Oscar model or whatever, because there's questions in there that some people think, oh no, that's not for me. Even when we've done the training, people have said, oh, I wouldn't ask that. Like,
absolutely.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. It's just there as a guide, isn't it? And then we just put together as well a guide for managers. Just so that they can kind of see the process. We did in the first pilot have all the heads, not all of them, all but 2, I think, heads of department were involved in the training, which I think was a really, really useful exercise, because they could completely understand what we were doing, why we were doing it, the structure, the process, that kind of thing. And then we politely asked them not to be anymore. But which they were very happy to be. They were very happy to be out of it, because they see the value in that peer-to-peer working from the teacher's perspective.
It's so great, because then they can respect that process, respect those relationships, but they're informed enough to own the bits of the process they need to lead and to understand the ethos of what you're trying to do. Many colleges where I work, they train the observation team discreetly. They don't link it necessarily even with training the teachers on what's expected on the other side of the table from them in terms of reflection and owning the development. And there's often this disconnect. And I think one of the strengths here for me working with you has been the way you've integrated the different roles and the different bits of the process, and you've upskilled everybody at the right point to allow them to come into that space well equipped.
Great. Absolutely. Shall I move on?
If there's anything. Great. Okay, so a few more questions to discuss then. We've started to touch on this, but a bit more detail maybe. How does coaching and those kinds of skills and approaches support this developmental process all the way through from that pre-meet right through to the end of the process, if you like, even if you see that it has an end, because it's quite cyclical, I think.
Oh, I suppose it's a tough one, isn't it? I think it's threaded throughout, as we've talked about before. It's that, buy-in, building that relationship and having that agreement right at the very start, which we do with coaching and mentoring agreements. You have that contracting, I guess, but we keep it quite informal. It's not a formal contracting process, but it's quite informal, set out from the beginning with the introductory email that the language that we use, we make it very clear that it's completely on the teacher's terms, so that you're building in that trust. And we're using a lot of theory behind it as well. A lot of the coaching models, a lot of the coaching theory, coaching principles that we use, within the questioning, within the observation itself, that, non-judgmental, that friendly approach, the way that the actions and the goals following the observation are written, framed in a way that's not me telling you what you need to do better. It's done in partnership, and they set their own goals, which then they've got that agreement and that buy-in as well. So it's a kind of thread that threads throughout the whole process.
It's everywhere, isn't it? It's in the language, it's in the thinking, but it's also in the documentation, and this kind of light level documentation where you're only really focusing on the things that are related to the learning and the growth, which I think is great. You're not trailing it in that kind of very bureaucratic way that some people do, where they just want to create loads of paper to put in a folder or loads of reports to go in Excel.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you develop that coaching skill set then? Because I think that's been going on over a few years as well.
Yeah, it has. So informally, we've got the coaching team. They come together quite often to talk about what's going on in the departments, who they work with. So we've got that team, first of all, who've got coach within their job title. So that's the first bit. We've been doing a lot of development with them over the last couple of years to make sure that they've got, a good amount of skills and confidence and knowledge. I've also this year supported them to do level 3 coaching qualification as well. So we've done a lot of training and development, but they've also got the formal piece of paper as well, which has, both have a lot of value. And then with the observers, obviously we've had your support, Joanne. You've come in and, virtually we've done quite a lot of training sessions throughout the process to make sure that the observers are confident with them, with their approaches. And we structured the training. We did a 12-week training program because we didn't just want it to be here's 45 minutes, now off you go. However, that some of that 12 weeks, there was only 3 or 4 sessions, I think, were live. The rest of it was just weekly little nuggets, a little video to watch, a little article to read and reflect on. And by having that team space, I could drop something there in the team site, and then people would comment on it like a message board, and we'd have those discussions. And that worked really well because obviously all our observers are all teaching practitioners, very, very busy people. Everybody's not always available to come online at a set time. So there was a lot of asynchronous learning and development with the coaching skills. And then, as I said, we've got my team that have kind of got their own little subgroup of observers, and they've just been checking in with their group saying, is there anything you need, any training, any development, any key things that have popped up that you want to unpick, almost like a supervision.
Yes, really great
in that kind of coaching, counselling, mentoring world. You have like supervision groups, don't you? So they've kind of used it like that.
Great for support, great for troubleshooting, great for extending the learning, but also really good on momentum. And I feel like when I've worked with you, one of the real strengths in this work has been your focus on how do I keep the focus with everybody on this? How do we maintain momentum so that we actually create the culture shift and the skills uplift? And I feel like all the small pieces that you're talking about are pieces of that jigsaw that have helped you create that change, I think. What can you say about the impact of the new model? And I think there are different people we might want to think about here. The teachers, what the observers have said about the change, and also the learners, of course, if we've seen feedback from them, and the wider sense of other people visiting you, such as inspection teams.
Yes, so I think we've talked quite a bit about teachers, haven't we? Around that, the changing approach, the building the trust, the culture, taking a bit more agency, having a bit more responsibility for their professional development has been, really, really fantastic. The amount of people that have gone, oh, this is different.
Yes, you can see that in your quotes actually of feedback.
That's the biggie. Yeah, this is different. For the observers, I think they've absolutely, on the whole, they've loved being able to go and see other people's classes, because that's a development opportunity in itself. And I've only done a couple this year, but last year I did several across the different parts of the college, and I learned so much. And I love going into other people's classes. I think it's an absolute joy.
It's a treat, isn't it? It really is a privilege.
It really, really is a privilege to go into other people's classes. And I think that's really helped keep that momentum and that positivity going as well, because it's and even where we do things like learning walks and the quality assurance and the management side, I've shifted the narrative and the language. It's not checking on, it's checking in. And it's going very much with that curiosity, not compliance kind of ethos, where it's, I'm really looking forward to come and see your group today. And so it's not, I'm coming to check your level 2s. It's completely shifts the mindset, doesn't it?
It makes such a difference, that.
Yeah, definitely. For the learners, we haven't had as much feedback as we'd like from students, and I think this is something that I would really like to explore a little bit further. One example that I can give impact, definitely for learners, we have got a hair and beauty department across 2 different campuses, quite a large hair and beauty department, and you know, like the blocks, the head model things, the freaky things that sit on the desks. One thing that one teacher was exploring was about equality, about diversity, and we noticed that these blocks, they're all white skinned and, you know, blonde, brunette, redheads, but they didn't have like African Caribbean textured hair. And one of the things that we ended up doing as a result of this was purchasing a lot more of these blocks with different skin tones and different hair textures, so that the students get experience of working. I mean, we're in Bristol, we're very culturally diverse city, and so for the students being able to see themselves in the work that they were doing, so that was a huge one for me, you know, raising the diversity profile of what they're doing in hair and beauty based on this lesson observation of this one teacher who said, hang on a minute. So that was a really good example. In terms of inspection, this is a tough one, because you know, there is a big kind of thing in education where people like to see data. They like to see numbers and spreadsheets and charts and that kind of thing. But, you know, Ofsted don't grade lessons. So that's a big thing for, you know, for everybody. With the inspector, so we had a monitoring visit in December, and one of the themes, so when we have a monitoring visit, they pick out, they have different themes, and one of the themes was around what is the college doing to develop teaching and learning, and I was like, oh wow. And I was expecting, I don't know, like English and maths, you know, subject deep dives, and they actually looked at teaching and learning as a theme, which kicked us, it scared a lot of us, but it was exciting, and it was fascinating. Because when I was explaining this model to the inspector, he was really, really interested, really interested in it. He spoke to a lot of staff that were very complimentary, but not just saying nice things. They were able to talk really articulately about how it had impacted on their practice. And that's the thing, this intent, implementation, impact thing. They constantly want to know, so what? And the feedback that I got was, this is a really great thing that you're doing, and we can really see what you're doing, but you just need to make sure you're closing that loop. And this is where we got a lot tighter on our meetings with our heads of departments, how we have half-term equality reviews, so that those meetings are minuted. So that we're having those conversations with those heads of department and saying, right, okay, so we can see that 60% of your teachers have been observed. What are the key themes? What are we seeing?
Wonderful.
So that it's minuted, it's there, it's captured as evidence, and it's closing that loop that we're doing this thing. This is the impact that it's having.
That's a great idea. I'm seeing
really,
lots of colleges
really
moving to that. The notion of impact review within the cycle. So we're doing classroom visits, there are actions being elicited with the teacher and agreed together, but the issue is, so what after that? And so having an impact review sense, which might be an online area where resources are written and created and shared, and there may be discussion boards and commentary and reflection spaces written, there may be case study work, video or written, and there's also obviously a series of meetings where people can share changes, can share practice developments, can share resources, and that can be captured in a form that then you can report on, which is about what the difference is, what the change has been made through that process. So it is about tightening up that subsequent part of the process often, and that's a common thing in the sector. So it's a useful sharing that.
Definitely. I mean, getting that feedback was so valuable, because we were able to just tweak our meeting agendas a little bit to make sure it's captured really, really well. And, you know, if we can, on the reporting side, I can say, okay, so in this department, you've got quite a lot of teachers looking at feedback strategies. Let's respond to that. Let's put on some CPD. Let's do some coaching. Let's do some intervention work. Then in a couple of weeks' time, we'll go back and revisit it. So maybe we'll go and visit some classes, speak to some students, speak to the teachers, so that we can check that our CPD is having an impact as well. So it's all about that closing the loop.
Virtual loop.
Impact.
It's like a virtuous virtual loop, isn't it?
And when I said earlier about the 2 documents that we're asking teachers to do, one is a self-assessment, one is a review. So at the end of the year, they go back to their self-assessment and they say, right, okay, have I now done that? Have I set out what I achieved? And also, where we're going to capture some really nice narratives on these documents, it's going to be a one-sider. What advice have I got for other people that might be interested in looking at this? And then that's all going to be saved online. So, and in under the different topic themes. So next year, I've got, oh, this person wants to look at their questioning. Well, actually, I can look at the questioning file and look at those 20 people that looked at questioning. I'm going to contact him because that looked really interesting what he did, and I'd like to find out some more. So you're building this online resource and also capturing the narrative and the impact as well.
I love that. Then they've got food for thought. You've got that professional articulation of what you're learning in your journey that others can then gain from, and it stops being a silo. You're starting to get that rippling of practice, which is, I think, in great organizations that are really focused on learning, we see that, but actually it's quite difficult to put the mechanisms in place. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay. Challenges then, if you had to pick out two main challenges.
There's been a lot.
There are loads in this process, but go on. Two big ones.
The two big ones. I think one has been just getting them done. Obviously, like a lot of organizations in the sector, we've had a lot of staff absence, COVID related and non-COVID related. So that's been a challenge. The observers themselves are feeling that because they might be picking up other classes in their own departments or, that kind of thing. And it's been a real challenge to just get the things done. Because for the managers, we're saying, hey, we wanted, we kind of put checkpoints, like I think 30% by Christmas, 70% by February half term, 100% by Easter. And we're way, way below what we were hoping. So people have found it really difficult to find the time. And this is the challenge when it's a peer-to-peer model, when people have got their own teaching timetables, it's difficult to find the gap. And in the true spirit of the program, if your teacher wants you to go and observe on a Friday morning and you're teaching your own classes on a Friday morning, it raises a couple of challenges there that need to be overcome. So that's the biggies, I think, is getting the things done, and getting that buy-in, because it's everybody needs to kind of nudge and say, come on, let's not forget, we've still got that kind of thing. Is that one or is that two? I'm not really sure.
That's two connected things. And with those two things, what did you find helpful? Was there anything you noticed actually helped you with those issues of the logistics and the buy-in?
The just getting it done bit, what's been really helpful is having the support of senior managers. By having those kind of targets, those KPIs for completion, that's given me a bit of oomph to kind of get them done. Whereas before it was, this is a nice thing. Now we've got a senior manager who's really hammering the heads of department on various different metrics. As in all organizations, everybody's got their targets and their things they need to hit. But certainly by having that senior manager buy-in has really helped get it moving. Really helped
making it happen. It's really the getting it off the ground and making it happen.
As much as I can nag people, sometimes having a title
helps.
Having a title in an organization when you're a bit further up the food chain, it certainly helps, doesn't it? So really lucky to have that support.
That is really important, I think. And what about with getting the buy-in? What do you think in your approach has helped staff to feel that they can begin to get involved, they can begin to trust, they're curious about it and they want to be involved in it?
I think a lot of it has been around the language. Building the trust, having teachers rather than managers doing it as well, I think has been really key in that, because it's not I'm going to tell your manager X, Y, and Z. It's really building that trust, I think, has been really important, and just getting the language absolutely spot on as well. We've kind of combed through even like the introductory email that we created. There's about 6 people that have had a go at it just to make sure that we were absolutely getting the message right. So not people, because, with the history of observations in our college, people will get that email and fall to bits. And that's what we don't want. People, observations for some people in the college have been such a cause of stress, and I don't just mean stress as in I'm a bit stressed, I mean
Really?
debilitating
Yes,
time
I
off
know.
work kind of stress. You know, it's really, really serious. So it's so important for us to get that bit right, because that's the last thing we want, is people being unwell or having to take time off, or you know, that kind of thing for this, because it's all for their own
Absolutely.
good.
Exactly. Exactly. And if it's done in this way, the interested, curious, open, reflective, respectful way,
Yes.
nobody needs to feel any of those negative things which have dogged the sector for decades, I think.
Absolutely.
What about further work? What is there that you still feel you need to work on? You said the learner feedback was one that you were considering.
I think the learner feedback would be a really interesting one, because some of the observers do try and speak to students. I think it depends on the context of what's going on and what they're there to do. If it's me, that's me with my quality head on. If I'm observing somebody and they're looking at their feedback strategies, I would just say to the students, so what's your feedback been like this year? How useful has that been for you? And moving just to kind of capture that narrative a little bit, I think. So for me, I think I would like to do a lot more work on capturing the student perspective.
People talk a lot about this triangulation notion, that maybe it's the observer, it's the teacher, it's information and data that might be part of that conversation, and it's definitely talking to learners to get their view as well, to really form a good sense of the picture.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you think needs further work?
So there's always things that need work, but there's always things. I could probably go on for ages, but I think we've ironed out the big things over the last 2 years. We've managed to get that kind of side, the reporting, how that looks, that kind of side of it. So I think kind of skipping forward a little bit, advice and top tips, I'd be thinking around, think about what your reporting looks like on this. If electronic forms are definitely the way forwards, Microsoft Forms, and you can do so many clever things with them, as long as your data's right. So anything that captures like an open-ended response is going to be a nightmare to report on. So for example, I've kind of put, what are they working on, to summarize, questioning, feedback, and it's tick the box. But I made the mistake of putting an other, and then people write all kinds of stuff in the other, and it just makes it an absolute nightmare to report on. So going forward, I don't think I would do that again. But think about, almost work backwards. What do you want the data to look like, and work backwards from that, because then that just helps the reporting so much more. I mean, we've got it's my line manager, he's really good with technology and stuff like that, and he's got the spreadsheet that populates from behind the Microsoft Forms, links into a program called Power BI. So that creates us a really nice dashboard that at a glance I can see, right, okay, which departments have got how many observations done, our learning walks feed into that, so you can drag out, you can report on the key themes that are arising from that. You can do some really, really good things with technology. So my advice would be, make sure your reporting's absolutely on the money, and also closing the loop. That's the biggie, whether it's through appraisals, through one-to-ones, meetings, however it might be, it needs to be documented, because otherwise how do you know it's working? And how can you capture the impact of it, and those stories and those narratives to present to managers, governors, Ofsted, whoever it might be?
You need to be able to capture, and you need to be able to then from that plan what happens next. So I think colleges who are capturing the kind of, as you said, the TLA type topics or areas of focus that are being discussed as actions and then are being put into place in the action planning really are interesting. Capturing at the first point the aspect of teaching and learning that the teacher is wanting to work on, so that you can start to see, 60% of our staff are working on feedback, or 40% are working on assessment, and suddenly you've got the beginning of a training program, haven't you? Or sharing resources, or building an area of archive case studies. It really helps you to drive the bigger professional learning and development cycle in your college if you're capturing at that level of detail, I think. Fantastic. Any other top tips you could give to others then before we finish?
No, I think that's it. The reporting, the data, Very,
Closing the
very
loop.
happy. Yeah, closing the loop is the main one.
Yeah.
But very, very happy to be contacted, email, Twitter, anything like that, if anybody wants to talk through what they're doing, or ask any questions, anything like that. One of the most valuable things for me when I was researching and planning this was speaking to other colleges. And I spoke
Yes.
to several,
Yes.
probably maybe 10 different colleges who were looking at different models, ranging from small, small training providers right up to large inner city college groups. So get as much information and as much knowledge behind you as you can, because then you find out what works and what doesn't, and those things to be aware of.
It's really helpful to find out what people considered, what they encountered, some of the glitches. It's almost
Yeah.
like cheap learning, I think, as you
Oh,
talk to
yeah.
people, have a much better sense of planning your own thing. What
Yeah.
about feedback then? So I think
Yeah.
we've got a couple of slides for feedback, which I think are really great.
Yeah. So what we did was we just put some feedback speech bubbles on here. So this would be an opportunity for anybody watching to pause the video and just take a look through some of these feedback comments. So this was from last year, where we asked staff to fill in their own form just to help us improve the process and shape what we were doing. But there's certainly key themes there around culture shift, looking at the one focus, people being brave, people having the confidence to try something a bit different, to not feel judged. So I think there's been a lot of work around the culture. I think it's really, really shaping what we're doing. What have I got on here? Yeah, a lot of real positives. How people just like to feel valued and listened to, rather than just being told what they need to be doing, whether it's right or not.
It just struck me reading this, how different it can feel, this observation process, from that frightening, intimidating, judgmental experience that many people are used to. And I think it really shines out from your quotes that the way this has been executed in your college by your observation team, people have received that very, very differently from some of their prior experiences.
Yeah.
And it's been really positive, welcomed kind of change, which is great.
Yeah, I've had so even people that don't really know me, people have stopped me and gone, oh, you're the person that changed the observations. And like, I've also a little claim to fame.
Excellent, fantastic. Well, I wish you all the best with the next
Thank
steps
you
of it,
very
and it's going to be
much.
really exciting to see how it develops, and maybe extending into reflective practice more fully, and closing and tightening that loop as an exciting next venture, and also looking at the learner feedback. But thank you for all that conversation today. I'm sure other people will find it useful, and I bet you'll be getting some emails. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, thank you.